introducing me, and very nice to see you all here. I hadn't had a chance to see you like this for many years, for 2-3 years, so thank you and a very warm welcome. I'm indeed going to talk a lot, and as we had just had this experience with the photography and the photographs and the pictures, and we talked about it, now we're going to talk about talk. Not about the pictures, but we're going to talk about talk. So my keynote is titled Teacher Learning Through Talk in Lesson Study. Who is familiar with lesson study? Okay, so half of it is, I know the usual suspects are here, I know. So half of it is familiar with lesson study. So the theme of this conference is learning as a collaborative interaction between learning professionals, research education and the workplace. And the theme of lesson study, so a collaborative way of professional development, aligns with this theme. So it's perfect to talk about this theme in this keynote. So you see there a picture of, which is part of our poster in lesson study, and you can download it. This is just some commercial. So you can download it at our website from Lesson Study NL. And you can see people talking to each other, but just putting people together and talking to talk is not collaboration, not yet. So you have to do some kinds of social norms and some conventions to make it a lesson study. Okay, I have a clicker somewhere here. So I want to talk to you about, I want to ask you to listen to this excerpt of Talk Daily. Many of you are Dutch, I think, so you can listen to the Dutch version of it. And there is an excerpt of it. The English translation is on the other side of this screen. So it's about 3 to 4 minutes, and I want you to listen to the excerpt.
Om te zeggen, de volgende bijeenkomst gaan jullie ontwerpen en dan ga ik hier zitten, dan mogen jullie dit gaan draaien. Dat is eigenlijk echt een intens verlangen op het moment. Ja. Omdat ik ze gewoon wil activeren. Want het is hun studie, niet die van mij. Ja. Het is hun ontwikkeling, niet die van mij. En ik merk dat het, ongeacht wat ik vertel, dat niet zozeer uitmaakt. Dat komt niet binnen. Ze moeten iets doen om het te ondervinden, om het te ervaren, om het door te hebben.
Mag ik een vraag stellen?
Ja.
Want bij de werkwijze van nu, welk concreet gedrag observeer jij bij studenten? Gericht op betrokkenheid.
Concreet gedrag. Als ik zie... nou, eigenlijk geen betrokkenheid.
Maar hoe zie jij dat?
Hoe zie ik dat? Ik zie dat ze naar me kijken, dat ze ja knikken. En dat... Nou, sommigen kijken niet eens, sommigen zitten achter hun telefoon.
Ja.
En die komen gerust na een half uur vragen van... Sorry, hoe zit je op achter elkaar? Dan zeg ik hem, dit heb ik net uitgelegd.
Ja.
Oh, ja, ik kom er wel achter. Het gebeurde gisteren en... Dat. Ja. Maar oké, dacht ik inderdaad, je komt er al aan achter. Ja. Ik ga het maar uitzoeken.
Ja, oké. Ja. Dus betrokkenheid... Geen betrokkenheid, dat kunnen we zeg maar operationaliseren in... niet weten wat ze moeten doen.
Ja.
Ondanks uitleg.
Ja.
Veel achter een telefoon.
Sommigen een deel.
Een deel?
Er is een deel die zegt ja, die stelt vragen. En zodra ik zeg, oké, jongens, hebben jullie nog iets voor mijn nodig? Dus nee hoor, kunnen we aan de slag? Ja hoor, en die gaan aan de slag.
Ja, oké. Ja, dus een deel van die groep.
Het verschil is groot tussen de aantal.
Ja, precies.
Dus een aantal die weten precies wat ze moeten doen, ze voorbereid gaan aan de slag. En er zit een aantal tussen die zitten achter de telefoon of achter de laptop.
En werken ze in groepjes of werken ze
Uiteindelijk werken ze in groepjes. Okay. Dat is nog het meest bizarre. Dus dan gaan die groepjes draaien zich om. En dan denk ik, daar hebben er 2 van opgelet en 2 van niet. En dan denk ik, wat gaat er nu gebeuren? Ja. Het gaat heel erg over ook samenwerkingsprocessen. En vervolgens zie ik dus een uitwisseling van oké, jij doet dat en de andere zit ja, dat is goed. En denk, je doet je dingetje dus, maar je hebt totaal geen idee welk onderdeel van het geheel is.
Ja. Mag ja?
moet je het uitleggen? Zijn die lessen zo ingedeeld dat jij het moet uitleggen en dat ze daarna aan de slag moeten? Of mag jij dat ook zelf anders indelen? Dat ik jou zeg, ik zou het heel graag op een andere manier doen?
Ja, er is een afspraak dat dit de manier is, maar ik denk dat ik daar best vanaf mag wijken als ik mijn doel bereik. Dus als ik het omgooi, denk ik dat het geen probleem is.
En ik ben dan namelijk heel benieuwd, als je dat wel zou omgooien, wat het effect zou zijn bij de studenten.
Ja.
Maar dat zou dus ook een mooie onderzoeksvraag kunnen zijn.
Ja.
Okay, thank you for listening in, the Dutch and the English version. Was it comprehensible for you all? So I'm going to ask you this question, because we are talking about talk. So how would you qualify this talk excerpt? So you can take your phone out and then go to, we have to have the split screen, to the QR code, and maybe you can type in some of your remarks. What did you hear? How would you qualify this discussion, this discourse? I'll give you a moment to type it in. It was a small excerpt of a just starting lesson study team in Amsterdam, and it was their second session. I think Martijn is juggling around. Hopelessness, recognizable, top-down, interactive, explorative, interesting, one-directional. Oh, there's a lot coming in. Frustration, interrogating, unpacking. Oh, you're very creative all. That's because of the start that you just had. Expert dialogue, helplessness, recognize, explorative interview. Oh, this is great. So what you just heard was a small excerpt of a 1 hour session with 5 teacher educators from the University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam, and they're from social work. And their main concern was that their students were not committed, they were not active, they were not, you heard it. And the one who brought in the issue of the students not committed, she was very frustrated. So indeed you saw some of these small words about that. And this is what we do in lesson studies. So we talk about the concerns of the educators or the professionals working in the field, in the workplace, and then we talk about their concerns, what they experience in their daily lives, in the daily classrooms. So this is what we're going to talk about. And then we know, of course, also that talk is a very strong mediating component, and it gives you an opportunity to explore different perspectives of how people think about these concerns, about how these practices happen in their own workplace. And it gives you an opportunity to move beyond your already acquired perspectives. So that's what we did just now. We talked about our pictures, and we can share our own perspectives and ideas. And there has been a lot of talk research. I'm not going to go in depth in it, but I can assure there's an abundance of talk research. And most of it has been focusing on teacher and student talk. So maybe some of you know the studies of the dynamic systems approach, where they use interpersonal theory to examine the interaction between teacher-student interactions and teachers' interpersonal style. I think you know all these studies if you're familiar with it, where they are from Tim Meinhardt, for instance, and Jan van Tartwijk and Wibbels. So how they study the interaction between the teacher and the students. There's also a lot of research on teachers talk on student learning data. So they work in collaborative groups, and then they work together to understand the student learning data which they discuss. And we also know that teacher talk in teams can be very productive, but what do we know about it? So what the basic features of those is that you have to focus on the discourse practices and the practices which are the conventions within the talk, so the social norms regulating interactions and participation, and of course the discourse topics matter. Discourse practices is that you do probe the problems and the issues that the teachers come in with and reveal them, that you provide concrete evidence and explicit reasoning on them, that you connect your specific classroom-based practice experiences with general principles you encounter in literature or with experts alongside of you, and that doing so, you build on others' ideas. And in this way, you can connect to each other's different perspectives. So we are going to focus on teacher talk in lesson study teams. This is a team, a lesson study team, in a primary school in, I think, Almere. This was pre-COVID, and you see here one of our trainers working with 4 teachers, primary school teachers, on a math problem. And you see here Laurens, who is the facilitator. So we have in the Netherlands, we have trained facilitators who guide and coach these lesson study teams. And I think this is the second session also where they discuss what kind of theme or focus or issue they're going to research in their lesson study. Okay, so also we know from research in lesson study that teacher learning within this lesson study team promotes improved pupil learning. And this occurs when teacher learning takes place over weeks. So not one shot or quick fixes, but over weeks. So the teacher learning is spread over during several weeks or months even. The classroom is the central location of the professional learning activity. So the practice you are bringing in or the issue we are bringing is classroom-based. And of course, we dive into and focus into the pupils' learning. So we wish to understand and have more insight in what pupils are doing in their learning and in their learning processes. This is a different approach than other kinds of professional development activities. But they take the teacher as a central unit of analysis, but in lesson study, we take the pupils' learning as a central unit of analysis. And of course, within lesson study, one of the mediating factors is collaboration with one or more other professionals. Okay, so this aligns perfectly with the ingredients of effective teacher learning. You probably all know from the research literature. So teacher learning or professional development should be active, it has been mentioned many times, it should be collaborative, it should be inquiry-based, so in this case, the pupils' learning, it should be practice-based, so embedded within classroom practice, it should be student-centered, so the student-focused learning, and of course, it should be teacher-directed, so the instruction or the flow of instructions within the lesson is important as to understand how it impacts pupil learning. So what my interest was when I started with lesson study, and it was about when I used to live in Singapore for quite a while, and there I got to know lesson study. And I saw that all these teams working with lesson study within their schools there, that they learned and they had a professional talk about their pupils within their classrooms. And I was wondering, what is happening there? And then I came back to the Netherlands and I met like-minded people who were busy also with lesson study. And we thought, well, how can we catch this? How can we catch this teacher learning? Because the talk in the lesson study is a very important mediating factor. And talk is structured like a convention, like scripts. And how is it that via these conventions in the lesson study teams or via these talking scripts or protocol scripts, how can we learn? How can we catch this teacher learning in lesson study via their teacher talk? Okay, so now we're going to do a split screen again. So what is lesson study? And I've talked about it a little bit, and you can see here it's people, 4 or 6 teachers, sometimes more, talking about an issue, about a concern they have together, about their classroom-based practice, and they want to have more insight and more understanding of what students and pupils do within their learning and their learning processes. So it stems from Japan, from already the first, the 19th century. It's the professional development framework, or maybe a methodology, which is, like the Japanese say, it's like the air. You don't know what you're doing. Well, you do know what you're doing, but I mean, when they do professional development, it's very, very normal to them. So we don't go to a special workshop, they don't go to a special day. No, it's just what they do every day. So teaching for them is research, is practice-based research. Everyday teaching is research for them. They want to know what moves and impacts student learning. So, and then from the 1999, it spread to the US because a Japanese teacher educator told about their experiences in lesson study in, I think it's the TIMSS conference, and then it spread throughout the US, and then it came back again to Japan, and so on, and since the 1990s and the turn of the century, it spread all over the world, and they even say it's the most fast-growing professional development approach ever. There are 3 versions, so it's school-based. All teachers are present as observant. As you would be the observants, then there would be a classroom on the stage and you would be all observing. This was my initial idea, to get a classroom here and do a lesson study. But, well, there were some practicalities we had to take care of. But I've done this before. We have had lesson study conferences in the Netherlands, and in 1 or 2 of them we have had a classroom come over, sit here on the what is this? Stage, thank you very much, on the stage, and then one of the teachers would perform the lesson, and we would all be observing what is happening, and of course all the children will be wired with microphones, so you can hear they're talking out loud. So this is school-based lesson study, and what I just told you about putting a classroom on the stage is called a regional lesson study. So it's a PD day where all teachers come, and even parents, to witness the lesson which has been designed by many of these teacher teams. And then there is a nationwide lesson study where there's a demonstration lesson by expert, so-called coaches. So again, as I said before, we see lesson study as teacher research. You see here a classroom I've witnessed in, this is my own picture, and I have indeed consent in using this for professional purposes. So you see here a classroom. These children are about 7 years of age. And they have this is a math problem they are solving. It's the LEAF problem, teaching through problem solving. And you see here only the teacher team which has designed the lesson can be within the classroom observing the children. And all around it are, of course, people who, like me, who were interested in doing what they were doing. And you can't see in the picture that in the back there are 100 teachers observing. You can't see it. But this is the custom in Japan. Do you think it will happen here? And because it's so normal, so the children don't even look up. It's for them, it's also, we are helping the teachers to create better lessons. And then, and my experience is, if you do this in the Netherlands, not with so many people, children don't even see it anymore. They look at their phones. They have, we have experienced it, don't we? And so we see that children don't even notice you observing or being in the classroom. So, as I said before, it's like it's so common. It's like the air, they say. It's like the air you breathe in. and they call it a method of research. It started in mathematics education. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Kenkyu is the Japanese name, and they even, and if you translate it roughly, it would call it is lesson study or lesson studie in Dutch. And then it went, as I told you before, it went to the States, and then they called it lesson study. So a Japanese scholar working at Patterson University in New York, he said, he coined it as lesson study, as a professional development approach. Then Catherine Lewis, who is a scholar in Berkeley, she called it lesson research. She is one of the founders of lesson study research group in the States. And then she brought it back to Japan, and she talked about what they did with lesson study in the States, and now they call it lesson study also in Japan. So this is a back and forth movement between how you, which was very normal or like the air in Japan, and then it went to the States and then back again. So now we frame it as teacher research. Okay, this is the iterative cycle of lesson study. So you investigate, you develop norms to collaborate, you set long-term goals, so you always align it with the long-term goals of your school for whatever topic you are bringing in or issue you're bringing in. So whether it is, maybe it's mathematics and you want them to be flexible problem solvers, something like this. And you align the issue you're bringing in your lesson study team with the broad policy with mathematics education in this school. You formulate your theme and focus. So what you just heard before, the excerpt, were teacher educators, what is the focus of our lesson study? And then you focus on a specific classroom where you want to perform or enact the lesson study research lesson in. And then, when you've done this, you have formulated your theme, you have formulated your goal, etc., etc., and then you study materials, literature, or maybe even you interview some children to gain more insight on what the issue is or what the problem or the challenge you're facing is. Then you go to the next phase, to the planning phase. You formulate the lesson goals. And then you specifically, this is very characteristic for lesson study, you anticipate student learning or student reactions based on the flow of instruction you're going to design. Then you design your teaching learning plan, which is the basis for your research lesson plan. And in this, you explicitly design what kind of instruction you're going to do and what the learning from the students is. So you design the flow of instruction and then you anticipate student reactions. So you make a prediction about how the student is going to behave or learn, etc. And then you draft a data gathering protocol. So you want to know whether the design of your research lesson works. And you have to know, you have to gather data as evidence from this learning. Then one of the teachers enacts the lesson, gives the lesson. The other team members, as you've seen in the picture, observe the lesson, and of course, based on the data gathering protocol, you gather data. In the next phase, you discuss all you have collected, observations, interviews with children, maybe other kinds of things you have noticed. You do a so-called post-lesson discussion. Usually it's done immediately after a research lesson, but my advice is always to do it in a shorter period between the research lesson and when you discuss it. And in order to consolidate what you have seen, in order to consolidate your learning or your learning goals, and then you integrate and transfer your new knowledge into practice. So you can see, you start with ideas or assumptions, and then it goes to ownership. The whole team collaborates and has ownership on the issues you're talking about and the things you're discussing. And the facilitator explicitly says, okay, this is our issue, this is our research lesson, and if person X is giving the lesson, person B can also give the lesson. So there's a consensus about who is giving the lesson and what is from whom. And of course, collaboration is very important. You have to have joint ownership and in order to achieve collaboration, a culture of collaboration within your team, and then and eventually this will lead to new knowledge or new practices or new practice-based knowledge for your teaching practice. So this was the cycle of lesson study we used all over the world to practice lesson study. We built or drafted a lesson study model for the Dutch situations. So we have 6 phases, and you can see the same iterations in it or the same phases, but we do 2 research lessons. So we hope to learn from research lesson 1 and then fine-tune the research lesson and then design another one, maybe for another classroom, or it could be the same classrooms. What we specifically do, we gather information about the observations of students is for us very important, how to learn to observe, and then gather evidence of learning. If you observe, do you indeed see what your evidence is for answering your research question? And then you can do this cycle 3 times or 2 times. Most schools do it 3 times a year. So you go through these phases. This is a theoretical model from Catherine Lewis. And you see here the intervening changes, or this is a kind of conjecture map. So here is the lesson study cycle, and here you have with the gray areas, you have all these ingredients for effective learning, and then it's active learning, collective participation, a content focus, a duration over time, and the coherence between the lesson study cycle and what is inside the practice theory of teachers. So, and in this lesson study cycle, you see here the same phases, and of course you connect your practice knowledge to external knowledge, so the resource kits. And then the intervening changes that hopefully your knowledge will change, your practice-based knowledge will change, that a collaborative culture will be boosted and enhanced. And then, of course, you will design instructional materials, lesson plans, and lesson series. And hopefully, you will have improvement of instruction and student learning. But in this theoretical model, the intervening changes of the intervening variable of teacher talk was not in it. So we thought such an important tool to be in a team where you talk and talk and talk about your concerns and your challenges and issues, and it's not in the intervening changes. So together with a number of international researchers, we thought it's maybe better it would be good to focus on teacher's talk in lesson study teams. What is happening in these lesson study teams that makes these changes in talk, in the quality of talk, and in the knowledge you gain, or the knowing of knowledge. Because knowledge is a static thing, like the PCK from Schumann, but knowing, when teachers practice, when teachers teach, they don't only know, but there is a knowing. So you don't know when you teach what kind of knowledge you're using, because it's a knowing. Okay? We also saw in our practices, in our own practice, because we coach lesson study teams and we researched, and there are a lot of pitfalls. So instead of engaging in in-depth talk, like what Mercer calls interthinking, so do you know this feeling when you have a small group of students or colleagues, when you interthink, then it all connects, all the puzzles are together. So you have a sort of a collective thinking, interthinking he calls it. And what we see in his research from Mercer, that lesson study participants, they stay on a more superficial level, and they tend to agree with each other on things they already know. So some of them tend to focus on the practicalities. We have to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. So the coordination of tasks. Some say, oh, we have this classroom, but this classroom has no teacher, and this and this. So they tend to linger on more superficial levels. And for the facilitator, it's good to know what to do about this, how he or she can do an intervention to avoid these kinds of pitfalls. So the difficulties for these interthinking, as we call it, is that indeed conversations can be more superficial, so they tend to agree with each other, and if people know each other, they tend to agree with each other even more. And some of them don't want to speak out in this group, or they have feelings of insecurity or maybe fear to speak out what they think about certain practices. And then you get this group thinking. They say yes and yes and yes. What we call in psychology, I was trained as a psychologist, what we call a yes setting. Everybody says yes. But even though they think it's a no, or a maybe, they say yes because of the group thinking, because of the group norms. So people who know each other very well, colleagues who know each other very well, so they practice congenial conversation. And this makes it more difficult to shift towards a more in-depth talk. And also, I told you before, there are scripts and conventions in lesson study, and this can be distracting to develop in-depth talk. And some people want to rush through the lesson study because it's nearly, Sinterklaas or Santa Claus, and it has to be finished or whatever, so they rush through it. It needs to be finished, isn't it? And so on, etc. So these are difficulties. There's not a lot of research on teacher talk. So as I said to you before, we connected. So there are, I think, more about 7 or 6 researchers around the world who study this teacher talk. So it's relatively, new. These are the people who do discourse analysis on teacher talk, and most of them is indeed focus on an interaction level discourse analysis, and they try to discern the patterns of teacher thinking and teacher learning within these lesson studies. Some also use different kinds of paradigms. So, indeed, the chat, for instance, like you see from Paul Warwick, he uses dialogic space as a boundary crossing object in which teachers can perform their talk. And the latest one is from Stefan Klikva. He does it similarly like Pete Dudley. So, but what I would like to add to this knowledge base of teacher talk, because we are doing so many trajectories now, and we don't know how we can influence the facilitators to do more quality interventions within the teacher talk, and hopefully teachers participating in the lesson study teams can also use this as their goal in developing quality teacher talk. So again, can we catch, or to what extent can we catch, teacher learning and lesson study via their teacher talk? I'm going to show you, this is brand new by the way, I'm going to show you talk data from 3 lesson study projects. And I think they're all here in the room, yeah. So project number 1 is a lesson study, a project funded by NRO, by the Dutch Ministry of Education. It started in 2021, in the middle of the COVID and the lockdown. I'm looking at Monique, that's true, isn't it? Yes. And it was very difficult to start, and we started online. So we had 7 teams of 2 to 4 teachers. It's primary education, and it started via Teams, and some of them sessions were live. We used the lesson study model. And the second project is from my PhD student, which is Jaja, who's sitting there. She wants to study whether the teachers in this lesson study team, which is based in a practice school in Jilin University in China, she wants to know whether they can develop a series of lessons using her pedagogy for maker education. So one team of 5 STEM teachers, it's facilitator-led, also like the other one, by Jaja and the teacher leader within the team. All meetings were live. Also, she also followed our model. She had multiple sessions during April to July in 2022. It had to be in this short period because she came out of lockdown in China, and then she had to work with the school in a very short window of time. It had to be like this. And project number 3 is also PhD students, PhD research. It's in 3 doing something with me. 3 consecutive years, so 2019 to 2022. This is the team who has worked the longest with lesson study. And the team stayed together, despite all the pitfalls, despite all the lockdowns, etc., etc. One team of 6 science teachers, also facilitator-led, via Teams and live meetings, also uses the Dutch model. And yes, I'm going to show you some of these. This is the lesson study model again, to jog your memory. And the one with the behavioral issues used in adaptations. So we wanted to identify behavioral issues or challenging behavior first before they started into the lesson study cycle. And that's what they did. So they recorded a small snippet of the lesson in their practice. And then they showed it to each other, and then they talked about it. So this is a small adaptation on the Dutch lesson study model. The one in China used also the Dutch lesson study model, which, because she had to do this in a very condensed period of time, she used 4 research lessons in this period, but the same features apply. So we focus on case pupils, which was also in the lesson study, a Dutch model, and then she went through a cycle of 4 of these research lessons. Okay, so the talk transcripts, very, very time-consuming work, I can assure you. So we have chosen 2 teams, 2 Dutch teams of Linde, Essen and Vuurtoren for primary education in the behavioral project. The transcripts of all sessions of the Maker project. And I chose 2 years, the 2019 years and the 2022 ones from project number 3 on sustainability issues. So we have lots more, but we're going to do this, I don't know, in another life, I think. So we developed a coding scheme based on the coding schemes already developed by the people I just showed you. So I used teachers' dialogic interactions features from Slavitt et al. And here you can see in its inquiry-based talk, exploratory talk, connected talk, and disconnected talk. We thought to make life simple, not to use an extravagant coding scheme, but just focus on these 4, whether we can indeed catch teachers' talk with these 4 codings. And then I said, as I said before, I wanted to know whether their knowledge or their knowing progresses when participating over a longer period in a lesson study. So I combined the knowledge types of Dudley, and I had another article from Cochrane, Madeline, I think she's called, Cochrane, and I combined the knowledge types. So knowledge of subject matter, speaks for itself, knowledge of pedagogy, knowledge of the student, knowledge of environmental context, and knowledge of course, the research lesson observation. And you cannot read it, I think. I will not ask you to do so. And this is the coding scheme for the knowledge types. And there's another one for the teacher talk. I'm not sure whether you can show it, the teacher talk. Yeah. So we have 2 of those where we score a code the talk transcripts with. Okay, can we go to the examples? Yes. So an example of inquiry-based talk is that you want to focus on improving and challenging each other's perspectives. What we just did was not challenging. It was about the creativity from the photography or the pictures. It was more on maybe on having an understanding of each other or each other's perspectives. So inquiry-based talk is focused on improving and challenging. So here are just 2 examples of a discourse between 2 teachers. They just don't like to do the assignment with each other, and then teacher B says, I'm not sure that if that is necessarily the case. I've had a different experience with these girls when they preferred collaborating, which was etc., etc. Exploratory talk is more focused on improving your knowledge and your understanding. And teacher A says, no, I think the beginning was too short. They were not able to fully grasp the idea. And then teacher B says, why do you think so? And what would be a bit different if the introduction was longer? Then we have connected talk, and then focus on proving and describing, and disconnected talk, focus on proving and expressing. So just some examples. We also collaborated together in coding these talk transcripts. So we use social cultural discourse analysis from Mercer. You've seen him before in the slides. And we chose interactivity segments. So these are fragments or parts of joint activity within a lesson study talk during a session that maintain a certain theme and a certain participation structure. So the facilitator is facilitator-led, so there is a kind of script or a convention how to do this. So we chose these kinds of fragments. And then, of course, the length of each interactivity segment can vary based on the themes or the fragments you choose. And we use multiple sessions to debrief or have a consensus about which code is what, and how can we understand this. And we code it in QDA and Atlas TI. So these are very, very preliminary results, and we do know we have to do another sweep through the data. But I just got the data in last week, so these are very preliminary. Okay, here you have the behavioral issues. How much time do I have? Okay. So you have here the behavioral issues. This is the frequency of word count. So the word count of the fragments we chose. So you can see here, it's a heat map. You can see here, these are all the sessions. I didn't choose 1 and 2 because these are the sessions where they set the norms and collaboration structure. But you can see here that most of it is connective talk. So they want to share their perspective on what they have been seeing. And then the knowledge. So you can see there's a lot of talk about knowledge of the research lesson. And it is varied through the sessions, but this is what we basically see. And in the first session, so the first design session, there's a lot of talk of pedagogic knowledge. Okay? This is the other primary school on behavioral issues. So here you have, again, the same pattern in this heat map. Lots of connective talk about sharing about what you've seen and what they think is going on. And then the knowledge is more about the students. What do they know of the students? But these are two different kinds of schools, and there were 2 facilitators leading it. So you can also see the difference in the style of facilitation. But hopefully later on, when we include the talk of the facilitator in this, we can maybe see it. And then we see something very different from the Chinese team. Look at this. Session 1 to 10, mostly focus on inquiry-based and exploratory talk. So within a peak in session 5, where they designed the lesson again. And then we have the knowledge types. So a lot of pedagogy involved. So you see different kinds of teams and different kinds of talk, different kinds of knowledge they build upon. Then you have the sustainability issues. These are the 6 teachers from Utrecht University. And they have done it for 3 consecutive years. So you see the difference. They start with, they're very focused. They start with exploratory talk and connective talk. And they, most of the sessions in the end are about exploratory talk. And they draw up again on knowledge of research lesson observation. And it's very varied. So we have to go through this again, whether this is indeed the right coding. So these are the preliminary results. So next steps are, of course, that we need to build a case story of each lesson study team that will function as a second order and then analytical database with what is happening in these teams. We need to have multiple sweeps to the data and increase the waves of data collection. We have many more teams we have already recorded. And of course, we need to know whether this indeed what we have, what the names of the teacher talk and knowledge types, whether this is really valid or reliable. So these are our next steps. As I said before, it's how we hope that this codebook can support the teachers, participative teachers and the facilitators in targeting their professional development towards student learning. And we do know that professional dialogue in these teams needs to be tightly focused to an increased stance, and otherwise the talk in the teams will be more haphazard. And of course, we need to discuss the facilitator moves. What are they doing in these teams? I think this is a lot. Well, there's some limitation. It's very time-consuming. How can we generalize this? There's a lot of data, variety of data across multiple sites. I've just shown you 3 projects, but we have many more, and there we have also talk data on. So there's a variety of data. Discourse of the facilitator was not included yet. Of course, the team composition can vary, and this can lead to some kind of impact on teachers' talk, and also culture-specific dialogue. So we know teams in China, teams in the UK work differently. So that teacher talk is different than our teacher talk. Okay, now I wanted to know, what's your takeaway? Can we catch teacher learning? Not sure who's orchestrating it in behind. Do you think we can catch teacher learning via that teacher talk? Oh, okay, what's the question? Oh, it's the wrong one. Okay, well, we'll do it like this. Can we catch teacher learning if we do it like this?
If you change the slide, you should get the rest.
I hope. Well, yeah, I wanted to show you some of well, we can do it in the Q&A, okay? So we are part of a Dutch consortium of 8 universities. I would like to thank all these people involved, because all these projects are part of these universities and organizations. I would like to thank Monique, project coordinator of the behavioral project, Jaja, who is in charge of the makeup pedagogy, and Michiel, who is not here, who is in charge of the sustainability project. And of course, thank you for all the research team, Lara, Rochelle, who is not here, Jaja, of course, Monique, and Martijn. So thank you very much for your interest and commitment.